Wednesday. Start now. Hello, the students. Good afternoon. This is Ramesh, Associate Professor of General Surgery. This morning we were discussing something about small bowel tumors, and meanwhile the inconvenience to be regretted as there is some problem with internet. And now let's resume this topic. And I think that time the attendance was slow, and now I believe some of you might have picked up. So let's have a rapid revision of what we have done this morning. So topic is small intestinal tumors. As you know, small intestinal tumors are very rare, and less than 10% of the total gastrointestinal neoplasia, they arise from the small bowel. So as usual, all the intestinal tumors, like any other tumors, intestinal tumors are also divided into benign and malignant variety. And let us speak about a few words about benign. And most of the intestinal tumors, they are benign. They are benign, like they may present as lipomas or adenomas or hemangiomas or neurogenic tumors. And most of these lipomas or adenomas or neurogenic tumors or hemangiomas, they are usually asymptomatic. This poses the biggest problem because though there is no clear-cut transformation into malignancy, they can occasionally present with symptoms like bleeding, and bleeding in certain cases it can be overt to that extent that the patient can turn to be anemic. So when such a condition like anemia arising because of bleeding from these tumors, they need to be treated. They need to be diagnosed. And another problem that we commonly face here is whatever routine investigations are being done, like X-ray abdomen or ultrasound or barium studies of the small bowel or even CT scan, nothing is conclusive. So when the diagnosis can be done most of the times post-operatively for whatever whatever complication this benign tumor brings to the patient, like intussusception, obstruction, bleeding. It can present with intussusception, obstruction, and bleeding. Then we go for laparotomy, and most of the times it's a retrospective diagnosis. That's why I have mentioned that it is difficult to diagnose. So the investigation modality of choice is, if the facilities are adequate, we can go for capsule endoscopy or small bowel endoscopy. Capsule endoscopy or small bowel endoscopy. And treatment is usually not required for these benign tumors unless there is a complication. That's what I have mentioned earlier. And in such complications like benign tumors arising and benign tumors posing the problem of overt bleeding, then we can go for small bowel dissection, where the tumor exactly is. We look at that, where the source of the bleeding, we look at that, and we go for small bowel dissection and anastomosis. This is in its nutshell about benign tumors. Let's take something about. And one more thing is, interesting topic is Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. This can come as a 2-mark question to you. This is an interesting syndrome discovered by Peutz and Jeghers. They are the main pioneer workers who have, especially Peutz is a pioneer worker who had worked on this. This is an autosomal dominant syndrome which has been known to be transmitted genetically through chromosome 19, which is associated with the gene STK11 that lies on the chromosome 19. Chromosome 19. So typically this syndrome is characterized by melanosis of mouth and lips with multiple hamartomatous polyps in the small bowel as well as colon. So melanosis of the mouth and lips with multiple hamartomatous polyps in the small bowel and colon, and sometimes associated with melanosis over the digits and perianal skin. This constitutes Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. This must be remembered that the polyp is hamartomatous. That means you do know the meaning of hematomatous, that is benign tumor-like malformation. Hematoma means a benign tumor-like malformation resulting from a faulty development of any organ. That is the definition of hematoma anywhere. And as such, these tumors, most of the tumors are innocuous. They rarely turn into malignancy. But what Puig has observed is, was something different. When he has followed those families, he could identify the lesser survival rate in these patients because of the potential complications arising from these what we call polyps, like intussusception leading to the obstruction and sometimes into the malignant transformation as well. So that's not actually the case in all cases that have been reported under Puig-Jaggers, but it is there is such correlation like decreased survival. We routinely advise a regular colonoscopy. It is wise to advise a regular colonoscopy, and especially if the patient it turns out to be female, we need to advise about breast and cervix screening also. So regular colonoscopy, breast and cervix screening in females. As I mentioned, if the polyp is noxious and if it is by chance it's found at the time of surgery, it is better to leave that polyp alone. We need not to do anything, and it probably requires only regular follow-up. And second thing is, if the bleeding is persistent, heavy, or recurrent. Okay, persistent, heavy, and recurrent bleeding sometimes requires blood transfusion, followed by resection of the small bowel and anastomosis. So resection is reserved for heavy bleeding and sometimes for the intussusception also. And what we do, if the polyps are found incidentally, and if there are multiple polyps, they are found at the time of laparotomy, they can be removed by giving a small incision over the small bowel, somewhere around the ileum or jejunum. We give it, and we can pass a colonoscopic snare through the enterotomy wound, and we can do polypectomies. But if a small segment of the bowel is only affected or involved by this Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, we can go for small bowel dissection as well as empty end anastomosis. Okay, this is about Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, right? This is the picture of the patient having Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. That is, you can classically see the melanotic pigmentation or the inner side of the lips. Okay, and next point is malignant tumors. What are the malignant tumors? As I have mentioned, tumors itself are rare. Malignant tumors are much more rare in the small bowel. But if at all they are present, more than 99% of the malignant tumors either belong to adenocarcinoma or they belong to carcinoid tumor number 2, they belong to lymphoma number 3, they belong to gastrointestinal tumors, stromal cell tumors or GIST or GIST, which are called mesenchymal tumors, an important component anyway. And let us start with adenocarcinoma. Because whatever the histological variety, whether it could be lymphoma or GIST or adenocarcinoma, it is most often difficult to diagnose because the patients present late to you. Unless the patient is having complication, it is unlikely that a malignant transformation or malignancy of the small bowel can be, it is unlikely to be discovered, it is unlikely to be diagnosed by routine screening processes or routine investigations for whatever other reason, right? Okay, let's speak about adenocarcinoma. Small bowel adenocarcinoma, unless mentioned otherwise, it is often found in the jejunum. It is a jejunal adenocarcinoma. Sometimes ileum also is involved. In its classic variety, adenocarcinoma, mind you, adenocarcinoma can arise anywhere in the gastrointestinal tract, but they are often found in the jejunum, followed by some cases ileum. And most of the times, the exact etiology and the pathogenesis is not known, that is unknown, but there is certain evidence that it is associated with Crohn's disease and celiac disease, familial adenomatous polyposis, hereditary non-polyposis colon cancer, HNPCC. I think in this slide HLN, ignore the TEL, HNPCC. And we have discussed about Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, PJS, Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. Make a note about these things because some of these points are important, at least for your NEET examination, right? So, though etiology is not known, there is increased frequency of Crohn's disease, celiac disease, familial adenomatous polyposis, hereditary non-polyposis colon cancer, Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, and they are often asymptomatic. If at all symptoms are there, they can present with bleeding, intussusception, or obstruction, intussusception, bleeding or obstruction. Prognosis is basically poor because majority of them are associated with Crohn's disease. The patient gets treatment for Crohn's disease, gets treated for Crohn's disease, thinking that we think that the patient is having Crohn's disease, which is much more common compared to adenocarcinoma of the ileum. So obviously the presentation becomes late. That's why carrying the same rate of poor prognosis. So prognosis is poor, and this is written as SX by mistake. It's TX treatment. So the classic treatment, if at all you happen to find small bowel tumor, it's supposed to be malignant by its appearance at the time of laparotomy, or if there is something like cryo is available or frozen section biopsy is available at the time of surgery, then you have to ideally remove the tumor along with the margin of 5 centimeters non-involved bowel, both proximally and distally, along with the affected mesentery. So we remove small bowel 5 centimeter above and 5 centimeter below the lesion, along with the mesentery, and we go for resection, and we go for end-to-end anastomosis. So that's what we call small bowel resection and end-to-end anastomosis. In very rare case where the distal ileum is involved, right hemicolectomy is the treatment of choice. Right hemicolectomy remains the treatment of choice. This is in its first variety, that is about adenocarcinoma. Yeah, this is the specimen. You can see the tumor here, and the uninvolved segments on both sides on either side have been removed. The mesentery has not been properly shown in this picture, but the mesentery also might be removed. Okay, second thing, this question can come as a definite question for you, carcinoid tumor. This is interesting topic because carcinoid tumors, these are the neuroendocrine tumors. Neuroendocrine tumors, practically they can appear throughout the gastrointestinal tract, but most commonly they arise from the appendix, and in its decreasing order of frequency, appendix followed by ileum, followed by rectum, they appear, but remaining parts of the bowel can also be involved. So it is neuroendocrine tumor involving the gastrointestinal tract arising from the appendix is classically known as carcinoid tumor. And most of these carcinoids, they are incidentally found. And it is said that about approximately 2% of the all appendectomies have been known to harbor these carcinoid tumors. That's why we send, it is a routine practice to send all the specimens of appendectomies for the histopathological examination. So if you subject the specimen of appendix for the histopathology or biopsy call, including the base as well as the tip of the appendix, the carcinoid can be found from the Leberkuhn's intestinal crypts. That's why called intestinal crypts of Leberkuhn. That's why next point you can see clearly, incidentally found arising from Kulczycki cells. You remember this point, Kulczycki cells at the base of intestinal crypts of Leberkuhn. So these carcinoid tumors, they are usually arising from these intestinal crypts from the Kulczycki cells. No, they arise as a primary, and the primary is significantly small. Usually they are small and associated with significant lymph nodal metastasis. Lymph nodal metastasis untundi, but tumor matram chennagane untundi. And more importantly, in 1/3 of the cases, tumors are multiple, and they are, in such cases, they are associated with dense fibrosis of the involving the affected bowel as well as the mesentery. So the cicatrix will be there. This cicatricial distortion of the small bowel along with the mesentery, this gives the classic radiological significant importance, radiological findings of these carcinoid tumors. Okay, that's why in 1/3 of the cases the tumors are multiple. And the important point why we are bothered about carcinoid tumors is it is prone to get into carcinoid syndrome because of the propensity of the carcinoid tumors to produce very important vasoactive intestinal polypeptide, that is nothing but serotonin, that is 5-hydroxytryptamine, 5-HT, 5-hydroxytryptamine or serotonin. This is a major secreted product by serotonin, carcinoid tumor. Of course, followed by histamines may be produced, and kallikreins may be produced. Prostaglandins may be produced like this. These are the vasoactive peptides, and the importance lies in that these vasoactive peptides escape the filtering power of the liver, filtering nature of the liver. They can circulate they freely, like thyrotoxic. What happens in thyrotoxicosis cases? You know what is the difference between hyperthyroidism and thyrotoxicosis? Circulating levels of increased circulating levels of T3 or T4 if present in the circulation, that is called hyperthyroidism. But effects of the increased circulating thyroid hormones is called thyrotoxicosis, isn't it? Likewise, these vasoactive peptides roam freely within the blood circulation and they are prone to produce carcinoid syndrome. That means classically there will be reddish blue cyanosis whenever these hugely, whenever we, at the time of surgery, without knowing, without our knowledge, or by knowing that we are operating on a carcinoid tumor, if we handle the tumor, because I have said no, they escape the filtering nature of the liver, and these 5-HT or serotonin, they escape into the circulation, and classically reddish blue cyanosis, uh, especially over the face and upper part of the chest, that is the classic thing, along with the flushing, along with the flushing. So there will be cyanosis, there will be flushing, along with there will be diarrhea, there will be diarrhea. So flushing attacks, along with palpitations, along with reddish blue cyanosis, along with the diarrhea, precipitating asthmatic attacks, ultimately initially leading to tricuspid regurgitation and eventually leading to pulmonary stenosis, followed by tricuspid stenosis. So these are the classic pentagon of carcinoid syndrome. There will be cyanosis, flushing, diarrhea, asthma, and cardiac lesions, right? So how to diagnose this thing? I had told you initially that it is an accidental or incidental finding, not accidental. It is an incidental or coincidental finding that some of the patient might be having carcinoid tumor. Otherwise, if you are having any suspicion that this patient is having primary or secondary, because carcinoid, once it crosses the primary level, apart from the lymph nodal metastasis, it is known to harbor into the liver, and liver happens to be the most common site of the metastasis. But the nature of the metastasis is, unlike the most other metastasis, these carcinoid metastases, they grow very slowly. That's why most of the patients, unknowingly, they harbor the liver metastasis of the carcinoid syndrome, carcinoid tumor. Sometimes may be manifesting carcinoid syndrome as well, but they have long spells of life, right? So, a somatostatin analog called actreotide is very useful agent both for treatment as well as for scanning purpose. That's what we call actreotide scan. And the second point, you see that actreotide scan, that is useful for differentiation of the secondary carcinoid tumor from a primary tumor. Because what happens is, it is technically difficult to identify which is primary carcinoma or secondary tumor, but this actreotide scan is very much useful. Along with another thing is, another plasma marker is there, that is chromogranin A, plasma marker chromogranin A. This is useful not only for prediction of the recurrence, but also for the prediction of the prognosis as well. So why I am speaking about recurrence and prognosis is, the treatment is simple, because if it is a primary tumor, you can see the first point here, resection, just do appendectomy, that's enough. But problem is recurrence. Recurrence remains the same. Then comes the plasma marker chromogranin A level studies, which accurately predicts the possibility of recurrence along with what could be the prognosis of this tumor also. And one should bear in mind that plasma marker is not taken from the blood or plasma. It is taken from the tumor bulk in this particular case. Okay. Next thing is, if there is a metastasis into the liver, hepatic resection for liver metastasis with actreotide coverage, we give actreotide. This actreotide coverage is very essential, because whenever we are manipulating the tumor, doing dissection of the liver metastatic carcinoid tumor, all the vasoactive peptides release into the circulation, and the patient may go into the palpitations, we don't know, and flushings and sinus. All these attacks are common. So, give proper actreotide cover when doing the surgery for such patients. And as I have mentioned, the tumor metastases grow very slow, giving long longevity to the patients. And classically, carcinoid tumors are both radio-resistant as well as chemo-resistant. So that means that surgery remains the mainstay of treatment. Of course, medically, you can manage with octreotide as well. Okay, you can see this is about carcinoid tumors. These are neuroendocrine tumors from appendix, ileum, and rectum. They are incidentally found. Primary is usually small and associated with significant lymph nodal metastasis. In one-third of the cases, tumors are multiple. They are known to produce vasoactive peptides like serotonin, histamines, prostaglandins, kallikreins. And in its carcinoid syndrome, there will be cyanosis, flushing, diarrhea, borborygmy, asthma, pulmonary stenosis, tricuspid stenosis. Treatment resection may be sufficient, but recurrence remains a problem. Octreotide scan is useful for differentiation of secondary from primary tumors, and along with plasma marker chromogranin A, which is useful for recurrence and for prognosis evaluation as well. And hepatic resection for liver metastasis with octreotide coverage to prevent carcinoid crisis. And these tumor metastases grow very slowly, giving a long longevity, and the tumors are radio resistant as well as chemo resistant. Right. Now let's go on to the third variety, that's lymphoma. Lymphoma, they can occur both primary as well as secondary, but usually secondary to systemic lymphoma. And again, systemic lymphoma is a huge topic that probably you might have covered already in medicine, general medicine topic. And what happens as far as lymphoma of the small bowel is concerned is, it is highly unlikely that Hodgkin's comes as a part of the lymphoma in the small bowel, and it is the non-Hodgkin's variety, and it is T-cell variety of in Western groups that's classically described as T variant of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that can present as that can present as a lymphoma. That is the most common thing. Okay, let's go through. Usually secondary to systemic lymphoma, and these lymphomas are more common again in Crohn's disease, just like adenocarcinoma of the small bowel. This is also more common in Crohn's disease and other immunodeficiency syndromes as well. And as I just told, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in its B cell variety, this presents as lymphoma unless mentioned otherwise. It is NHL B cell variety. You have to think it as NHL B cell variety, because Hodgkin's almost never comes from the intestine, small intestines. So NHL in its B cell variety, that presenting features as anemia, anorexia, weight loss, or just like other symptoms of lymphoma only, systemic lymphoma only, but pertaining to the bowel, it has got this propensity like perforation, right? And coming to the T cell variety is seen in celiac disease. Celiac disease, this tropical sprue presents with diarrhea, right? Diarrhea or obstruction, like not obstruction, tropical sprue classically presents with diarrhea and malabsorption or malnutrition. But in this T cell variety, you have to suspect this thing, because in a known case of celiac disease, if the patient is having worsening attack of diarrhea along with pyrexia of unknown origin, even after the proper evaluation for more than 3 weeks, the cause is unknown. We call it a pyrexia of unknown origin, or PUO. And sometimes it might be associated with obstruction as well. Intestinal obstruction also is a possibility. And the third variety is Mediterranean lymphoma. Mediterranean lymphoma, the word itself says that arises in the Mediterranean zones, like South Africa, Middle East countries, likewise. And by the time, this is an unfortunate diagnosis, because by the time it is diagnosed, it itself is widespread. Okay. And another thing is, that's again Mediterranean lymphoma that is not amicable for radiation or surgery, likewise. That's another problem with this, especially with Mediterranean and Burkitt's lymphomas. And another thing is Burkitt's lymphoma. Burkitt's lymphoma is more common and more aggressive. It comes in an aggressive form, especially in children, when the lesion lies in the ileocecal junction. Okay, Burkitt's lymphoma is aggressive, seen in children, affect the ileocecal junction. That's what I have mentioned there. And yes, chemotherapy is the treatment of choice. Surgery is for obstruction or bleeding or perforation. Like, so there is no other way. Surgery is only for treating the complication, but not for the implication of the pathogenesis or curing of this disease. Lymphoma itself, any lymphoma is, we use chemotherapy, right? But surgery is reserved there are certain indications that is beyond the scope of this subject as well. But whenever there is obstruction or perforation or bleeding, uncontrollable bleeding, then we have to go for surgery. So these 4 points we just remember, that's enough. That is NHL, when the B cell variety comes, when the T cell variety comes, when the Burkitt's lymphoma comes, where the Mediterranean lymphoma comes, what is the role of surgery as such. Okay. And another important topic finally is GIST. What is the GIST? This enigmatic thing probably is much more interesting to you for the postgraduate level, not for the undergraduate level. GIST stands for gastrointestinal stromal cell tumor. So these tumors classically arise from the mesenchymal tissue. They occur anywhere in the gastrointestinal tract as usual, but unless mentioned otherwise, it arises most commonly from the stomach, especially past 60 years age group also, especially in men. Okay, and especially etiology is unknown. So that's what mesenchymal tumors commonly arising from the stomach in the age group of 50 to 70 years, right? And this poses another technical difficulty because it is difficult to diagnose the GISTs. This point has to be remembered. Difficult to distinguish between benign and malignant even on proper histopathological examination. So what to do? So the thing is, we depend on tumor markers like any other malignancy, unequivocal, right? Unequivocal malignancy. This tumor marker is c-KIT. It increased levels of c-KIT. You remember this c-KIT. Even in Vishakhapatnam also we are doing that, not in Gayatri, but in some other institutes, like in KJH also it's there. c-KIT, increased levels of c-KIT along with CD117 staining, they correlate very well with the degree of malignancy or the differentiation of the malignancy. Otherwise, what we routinely do is, once we do know that it is a GIST tumor, we depend more on CT scan only, because more increased size is probably suggesting you or taking your back, thinking that probably the tumor is growing rapidly and it's more transformation into malignancy, right? So this mesenchymal tumor is positive correlation not only with increased size but confirmatory correlation with c-KIT levels with CD117 stain. And another thing is, of course, etiology is unknown, and there is a strong association and with the neurofibromatosis patients. Whenever there is neurofibromatosis, that is these GIST tumors are likely what we call Gleevec. I think there's not written. Yeah, that's there. And maybe asymptomatic, as I mentioned, that's probably not symptomatic and may present as incidental mass on CT scan. And what are the clinical features? They are also vague. Lethargy, there will be pain, nausea, and hematemesis or melena if there is significant bleeding. And what is the treatment? Treatment is surgery. Surgery is the treatment of choice, as the stromal tumors or any mesenchymal tumors, they are radio resistant and they are highly chemo resistant. But important point is, yes, imatinib. They have written imatinib. Okay, what is this imatinib? In early 2000s, this has come into the market with a positive prediction. This is a tyrosine kinase inhibitor. This is a tyrosine kinase inhibitor, imatinib. What we call it is Gleevec. That's name, branded name. That is effective in advanced disease. Once the disease is advanced, it has got proven efficacy, fortunately, and also it is used as a part of an adjuvant therapy, right? This, remember this imatinib, which is a tyrosine kinase inhibitor. So this is about something about GIST. So mesenchymal tumors commonly arising from stomach in the age group of 50 to 70 years. Yes, difficult to distinguish between benign and malignancy, even on HPE. Tumor marker c-KIT, increased levels, and CD117 staining. This they correlate with malignancy. Etiology not known. More seen with enough patients. Asymptomatic or incidental Clinical features, they are vague. Treatment is surgery, and imatinib is of course quite effective, in fact. So that's something about intestinal tumors. How do you basically concentrate more on carcinoid tumor? That is the one potential question. Sometimes rarely someone might ask about Creutzfeldt syndrome if you perform well. we are interested to ask about such questions. Okay. Next thing is intestinal divertica. This Meckel's diverticulum might come to you. This has got strong propensity for 4-mark question. In it, what is a diverticulum? Diverticulum. Anyone who can answer what is a diverticulum? What is a diverticulum? Okay, I don't know whether I can see it now or not. Okay, diverticulum. Anything. It is a vague term. It's not by diverticulum. The word diverticulum hasn't come by definition. Diverticulum means an outpouching from an hollow organ. From a hollow organ, if there is outpouching, that's called diverticulum. So classically, diverticulum can occur throughout the gastrointestinal tract, right from the esophagus to the rectosigmoid junction, but mind you, not from the rectum. Never diverticular are never reported in which part of the GAT అంటే rectum అని చెప్పేసి పెట్టాలన్నమాట. because మిగతా దగ్గర అన్ని దగ్గర రావచ్చు. And what we call is diverticulum are grossly divided into congenital variety and acquired diverticuli. So the main difference between the congenital and acquired is congenital, unless otherwise mentioned, it is only Meckel's diverticulum only. So it gets all 3 coats of the bowel wall with it. So there will be mucosa, there will be serosa, there will be muscularis mucosa. But in case of acquired diverticuli, muscularis mucosa won't be there because there will be only mucosal herniation from the point of entry of the blood vessels into the small bowel. That classically arises most commonly in what's called jejunum. Okay, we will come to that later. And sometimes the next another point is esophagus. Probably esophagus topic is over to you. Probably pseudo-diverticulum from the esophagus and diverticulum from the esophagus. That topics might have been covered to you by some other professor. Okay, let's speak about the intestinal diverticula. Diverticula, they are the outpouchings from the hollow viscus, right from the esophagus to the rectosigmoid junction, right? So what is congenital? So congenital diverticulum is a persistent remnant of vitelo-intestinal duct, also called congenital diverticulum, is also called Meckel's diverticulum because this is only congenital diverticulum that is described. So what is persistent vitelo-intestinal duct? Vitelo-intestinal duct usually closes just before prematurely before giving birth to the baby. But if the duct is persistent, so up to the umbilicus, that naturally extends. So this VA duct, if that is persistent and that remains, that's called Meckel's diverticulum. Okay, this occurs in 2% of the patients. Rule of 2, just remember it is 2% of the patients, which is this Meckel's diverticulum is 2 inches long. This Meckel's diverticulum lies 2 feet proximal to the ileocecal junction, and this Meckel's diverticulum occurs in 2% of the patients. Okay, occurs in 2% of the patients, 2 inches long, 2 feet from the ileocecal junction on its anti-mesenteric side of the ileum. On its anti-mesenteric side of the ileum. So what happens? It contains all 3 coats of the bowel wall and it has its own blood supply. So it's not dependent for its nutrition from some other part of the bowel. It has got its own blood supply. That's actually tricky, and that itself causes some other problems like diverticulitis. We will come to that point later because it is vulnerable to obstruction as well as inflammation in the same way as appendix. It is vulnerable to obstruction, so intestinal obstruction might come, and inflammation. So just what appendix does, blind lumen. So this is also comes as Meckel's diverticulitis, we call it, just like appendicitis. Itis means inflammation, right? So that's what that's written. A persistent remnant of vitelo-intestinal duct called Meckel's diverticulum, 2% rule, contains all 3 coats of bowel wall and has its own blood supply and vulnerable to obstruction and inflammation in the same way as appendix. In fact, it is well said, and it's we are well trained, and we train the students in such a manner that whenever we are doing appendicitis case, and if you happen to find the appendix is in quite healthy position, you try to look at the Meckel's diverticulum, try to see the Meckel's diverticulum, because Meckel's diverticulum is a midgut structure that is arising from the midgut. Vitelo-intestinal duct is a part of the midgut, and this is especially true whenever there is Meckel's diverticular perforation is there, that is local collection of pus is there, local collection of free fluid is there. But it is presentation would be different anyway, because in case of perforation, it mimics more like a duodenal perforation rather than appendicular perforation, because it is a structure from the midgut. But whenever there is infection or inflammation, it mimics more like appendix. You have to remember this point practically. In 20% of cases, yes, This is well said. In 20% of the cases, the mucosa of Meckel's diverticulum contains heterotopic epithelium of gastric or pancreatic or colonic type, right? Gastric or colonic or pancreatic type, and this predisposes to all its to majority of the complications. In fact, okay, majority of the Meckel's diverticulum, they don't cause any problems because 2% of the patients are chala ఎక్కువ. But అదే ప్రాబ్లం కాచేది ఇన్నాక్చువస్గా ఇన్నోసెంట్గా పడి ఉంటుంది. దట్ మీన్స్ మెజారిటీ ఆర్ asymptomatic and difficult to see it. It is very innocuous and it is very unlikely that it will be seen on contrast radiology. You can't see something like Meckel's diverticulum. You can't make a diagnosis because the mouth is wide, and so it won't be seen as a frank diverticulum. It won't be seen. And so what are the ways of presentation? If at all it poses problems, yes, first thing is hemorrhage. Yes, in the previous point I have mentioned that it might be associated in 20% of the cases, like epithelium of gastric epithelium. What happens whenever there is gastric epithelium? What happens in our stomach? Wherever there is acid, there is ulcer, and the gastric epithelium is there, that can transform into peptic ulcer. And when there means there will be mania, or there may be hematemesis, like symptoms may be there. Like all the symptoms of APD may be there, that presents. So how to detect this particular component of hemorrhage is, okay, it can come from stomach, it can come from duodenum. So all these causes of bleeding by doing colonoscopy, everything, all these are excluded. Then you go for radioisotope scan with the technetium 99M. Radioisotope scan with 99M technetium scan will definitely delineate Meckel's diverticulum, presence of Meckel's diverticulum with heterotopic gastric mucosa, right? So that's the first presentation is hemorrhage. Second thing is diverticulitis. Yes, just like appendicitis, there may be inflammation of the Meckel's diverticulum, and because it has got its own blood supply, yes, it can get infected. So diverticulitis. And third thing is intussusception. Yes, it can Meckel's diverticulum itself can be a lead point for a ileal intussusception or ileocolic intussusception. Okay, ileum to ileum or small bowel to even the small bowel to small bowel intussusception or ileocolic intussusception is a possibility. And fourth thing is chronic ulceration. Yes, the patients may complain of vague pain, something around the umbilicus, and because it is a midgut structure, all the pain radiates. Midgut structures pain radiate to the umbilicus. You know that, no? And fourth thing is chronic ulceration. Yes. And fifth thing is intestinal obstruction, because it is also part of the intestine, it can get obstructed. And the sixth thing is rarely diverticular perforation. So all these ways are different ways of presentation of Meckel's diverticulum. Now you can see clearly a picture of Meckel's. This is outpouch. This outpouching is Meckel's diverticulum. That's what is Meckel's diverticulum with its blood supply. That is see. So this is a most importantly PG bit anamata, letters hernia anadi. So when Meckel's diverticulum is a component of inguinal hernia, or more so a component of femoral hernia, that is called letters hernia. So hernia is a huge topic, and it contains a lot of eponyms and lot of names, and the name of letters goes by the component is Meckel's diverticulum. Either you speak about inguinal hernia or femoral hernia, but usually it's associated with femoral hernia. So what is the treatment? So once you do laparotomy and you find them there is Meckel's diverticulum, no, don't worry, just leave it alone, because once that is wide mouth is there, it is unlikely that it gets obstructed and it gets inflamed. And it so far మీరు ఓపెన్ చేయనంత వరకు దానికి ఏం అబ్స్ట్రక్ట్ బ్లీడింగ్ వచ్చేయలేదు, ఏమీ వచ్చేయలేదు, కాబట్టి హెమరేజ్ వచ్చేస్తుంది, లేకపోతే అల్సర్ వచ్చేస్తుంది, క్రానిక్ అల్సర్ వచ్చేస్తుంది, అబ్స్ట్రక్షన్ వచ్చేస్తుంది, ఇవన్నీ స్ట్రిక్చర్ వచ్చేస్తుంది, ఇవన్నీ అన్లైక్లీ. సో లీవ్ దట్ alone. So safe to leave alone if found in the course of laparotomy, if mouth is wide and if mouth is not thickened. So what does this thickening this imports that there is a chronic infection or inflammation, chronic inflammation, step by step, so that it got the mural thickening might be there. Okay, if that is not there, and if the mouth is wide enough and mouth is not thickened, just leave it. But once there are complications like whatever appendicitis, whatever diverticulitis is there, if the broad-based Meckel's diverticulum is found, that should not be chopped off and invasionated. That's what we do for appendicectomy, but not for Meckel's diverticulum, because of two things. One is there will be complication of stricture, because once you form the, you invaginate and crush that part of the base of the Meckel's diverticulum, there is propensity for stricture formation, leading to that. What happens, that leads to what we call blind loop syndrome chronically, right? And second thing is, there will be heterotopic, that's what we have mentioned, in 1 in 5 patients there may be heterotopic mucosa, gastric mucosa, if by chance it's there, and again there's a chance of ulceration. So what we do is, it is safe to excise diverticulum, we do resection, and we suture the base of the uh, Meckel's diverticulum, base of the Meckel's diverticulum, suturing at its base, or just use nowadays we can use linear cutting stapler will be there, which automatically that itself, that apparatus itself cuts and sutures, approximates both the edges. Okay, if the base of the diverticulum is thick, if the base of the diverticulum is not healthy, then what we have to do is, we obviously remove some part of the small bowel along with the mesentery. Some part of the small bowel will be removed along with the diverticulum, Meckel's diverticulum, and resection and anastomosis we do that. End-to-end anastomosis we do that. That what we call small bowel resection. SBR means small bowel resection, and end-to-end anastomosis. This is all about Meckel's diverticulum. So that you make a note. Just if you go through once, that is quite easy to remember. You can remember all points, including letrosenia, technetium 99mm scan, small bowel resection, and everything. This photograph is of jejunal diverticulosis. Yes, this is a classical picture of acquired diverticular. Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah. Now we will just before finishing, we will speak about acquired diverticulae. Acquired diverticula invariably develop in the jejunum from the mesenteric side as a result of mucosal herniation at the point of entry of blood vessels. That's what I have mentioned in the initial part. They are asymptomatic, they vary in size, they are frequently multiple, and they are asymptomatic. They are present incidentally, they are rarely seen on radiological imaging, and they may present, but the thing is, they may present as malabsorption, because the diverticulum is there, the stasis, the food. What happens for the bacteria? What bacteria, they usually go and stay in the large bowel, but here because of the food stasis, the bacteria grow, and the colonization of the bacteria will be there in the in the diverticular part of the jejunum. And as the multiple diverticulae are there, they can go for bacterial overgrowth will be there, and there will be blind loop syndrome. And what is this blind loop? The food will be stasis, there will be stagnant in the all these diverticula, and there are different kinds of blind loops, right? Like self-filling blind loop, or self-emptying blind loop, or long efferent blind loop following something like polyagastrectomy, or there may be intestinal stricture. That's what I have mentioned about the closure of the Meckel's diverticulum, right? Like intestinal stricture type of blind loop might be there, or stenosis anastomosis blind loop is there, or ilio, something like iliosigmoid fistulation blind loop might be there. So blind loop is another different topic. Probably myself or someone else will cover about that at some point of time, maybe in next class or so. So you have to remember that whenever there is blind loop, there will be malabsorption. Okay. You should also remember that you should not get confused from inflammatory bowel disease from irritable bowel disease or irritable bowel syndrome. Okay. Likewise, from a short bowel disease to the blind loop syndrome. This is something people get confused. No, don't get confused. Okay. Right. They may present as malabsorption, and sometimes they may acquire diverticulum also can present as a emergency because of inflammation or bleeding. Bleeding is rare anyway, but if there is diverticulae in the sigmoid colon, bleeding is common, but in the jejunal diverticulae, bleeding is unlikely, but perforation again is common, and perforation poses huge headache because it looks like a minor topic to you, but it's a major headache for the surgeon and for the patients also. Because when we come about the treatment component, if there is multiple diverticula, what you can do? That precludes resection and anastomosis, obviously, because that is the upper part of the, that is the part where all this fat will be absorbed into the body, right? Jejunum is the part of the fat, because otherwise, even in the blind loop syndrome or even in the malabsorption also, minerals or what we call carbohydrates or protein absorption, they won't get disturbed. Only that is the fat absorption that gets disturbed, and the more and more bacteria they grow up, what can do? Fat emulsification won't be there properly, so the patient goes into malabsorption, right? So a small part of the diverticulum, two or three diverticula are there affecting the jejunum. Yes, you can go for some limited resection of that part of the jejunum and go for end-to-end anastomosis. But if there is, as I mentioned, inflammation or perforation is there, it is unlikely that you can go for anastomosis. You have to go for stoma. I mean, rather than creation of a stoma. And creation of the stoma, like jejunostomy, is technically not possible. It is associated with a lot of complications. It's not ileostomy. Probably stoma topic cover avukothe probably next week నాకు చెప్పమంటే నేను చెప్తాను, అప్పుడు we will come to that. Because degree of contamination ఎంత ఉంది, physiological condition of the patient ఎలా ఉంది, ఆ given setup లో మనం మానిటర్ చేయగలమా లేదా, ఆల్ ద కాంప్లికేషన్ ఆఫ్ జెజునోస్టమీని మనం మేనేజ్ చేయగలమా లేదా, ఇవన్నీ బట్టి కూడా ఆధారపడి ఉంటుంది. డిపెండ్స్ ఆన్ ఆల్ దీస్ ఫ్యాక్టర్స్. సో వాట్ ఈస్ ద ట్రీట్మెంట్? Elective resection of affected small bowel segment if limited involvement of the jejunum is there. Yes, that can be done. And if perforation is there, small bowel resection with anastomosis or stoma. Yes, that's what just mentioned. In case of extensive jejunal diverticulosis, pray to the God. Okay, but that's technically very difficult, because in case of extensive jejunal diverticulosis, what happens is you cannot, that precludes that we can't go for resection of all these things right now. We come to these technical problems on table when doing laparotomy. You should be very good judge at doing such things, because when something like mesenteric vascular ischemia is there, leading to thrombo, probably underlying the thrombus may be there, underlying embolism might be there, whole of the SMA, superior mesenteric artery is gone. What will be done? I mean, immediately distal to DJ flexure, that is duodenal flexure, to the extent of splenic flexure, everything is gone. What can you do? You can't do anything. You might not have explained to the patient anyway, right? Likewise, extensive jejunal diverticulosis, that's again poses the same scenario, and where we give group of 3 or 4 antibiotics like metronidazole or rifaximin, tetracycline. Likewise, we give that prolonged antibiotic therapy to avoid bacterial overgrowth. And we go on doing that, giving ciprofloxacin ఒకసారి, metronidazole ఒకసారి, tetracycline ఒకసారి, rifaximin ఒకసారి. ఈ నాలుగే గుర్తుంచుకోండి. ఈ నాలుగు మ్యాచ్ రాస్తుంటాడు మీ సర్జన్ ఎవరైనా కూడా. ఈ డైవర్టిక్లోసిస్ ఉంటాయి, ఎక్స్టెన్సివ్ డైవర్టిక్లోసిస్ ఉంటాయి కనుక అలా రాస్తే అతను మంచి సర్జన్ అని అర్థం, రైట్? నెక్స్ట్, లిమిటెడ్ రిసెక్షన్ లీవింగ్ రిమైనింగ్ సెగ్మెంట్స్ ఆఫ్ ఎఫెక్టెడ్ జెజునమ్, that is highly effective, but at times it may fail to deal with bacterial overgrowth. సమ్టైమ్స్ మిగతా డైవర్టిక్లలో ఉన్న ఈ బ్యాక్టీరియా మళ్ళీ కన్నవన్నీ పడుకొని లేస్తాయి. సో మళ్ళీ బ్యాక్టీరియా ఓవర్గ్రోత్ రావచ్చు. ఓవర్గ్రోత్ వచ్చిన తర్వాత ఇన్ఫ్లమేషన్ వస్తుంది. ఇన్ఫ్లమేషన్ వచ్చిన తర్వాత ఇన్ఫెక్షన్ వస్తుంది. ఇన్ఫెక్షన్ వచ్చిన తర్వాత పెర్ఫరేషన్ రావచ్చు ఆర్ బ్లీడింగ్ రావచ్చు, రైట్? లిమిటెడ్ రిసెక్షన్ లీవింగ్ రిమైనింగ్ సెగ్మెంట్స్ ఆఫ్ ఎఫెక్టెడ్ జెజునమ్ మే ఫెయిల్ టు డీల్ విత్ బ్యాక్టీరియల్ ఓవర్గ్రోత్ or recurrent attacks of inflammation or bleeding. So this is a classic picture showing multiple jejunal diverticulosis, right? Right, with this we have completed diverticulosis as well as small bowel tumors, and Meckel's diverticulum, and concentrate about carcinoid tumor or carcinoid syndrome, and maybe Peutz-Jeghers syndrome as well. Right, any questions please? It's almost 1 hour. Yes, you are free to ask any questions. Girish, you type there, మీరు అక్కడ ఏమైనా క్వశ్చన్స్ ఉంటే టైప్ చేయండి, and I will wait here for 5 minutes if there are any questions. గిరీష్, క్వశ్చన్స్ ఏమైనా అడిగితే ఎలా పెట్ట పంపించు. ఎవరు ఉన్నారా లేరా? ఏమైనా అర్థమైందా లేదా? ఆర్ ఎనీ మోడిఫికేషన్స్ దట్ ఐ హ్యావ్ టు మేక్? I need your feedback or suggestions. Any questions? I don't know how to tackle this. I am waiting for this Kumar. Kumar! Questions?
అడగండి సార్ చాట్ బాక్స్లో డౌట్స్ అడగండి. ఎనీ డౌట్స్?
Any doubts? Hello. Just you type here. I will be waiting here. Any modifications that you need from my side, or any suggestions as far as lecture is concerned, or any of your doubts, please type it here. I will be waiting to answer you. Okay, no more questions are got tired of. Okay, I will be waiting for 1 more minute. Any questions or suggestions? Have you understood or not? More important is dealing these complications rather than teaching as far as such things about diabetic process and everything is concerned. Just go through again later. Yes. Okay, I am skipping off. Right. Wish you all the best. Bye. Bye. Thank you. Hello.